You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating all things Jewish.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
On January 16, 2003, NASA launched the space shuttle Columbia. On board, a crew of 7, including Colonel Ilan Ramon, Israel's first astronaut, who was serving as the payload specialist for the 16-day mission. Ilan, whose mother and grandmother were both survivors of Auschwitz, had already flown more than 4,000 hours in Israeli jet planes as a squadron commander and then as the head of the Israeli Air Force's Department of Operations and Weapon Development. As an astronaut, Ilan Ramon was an Israeli hero. On February 1, 2003, as Columbia was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere after completing its 16-day mission and only 16 minutes away from touchdown, a small piece of foam insulation the size of a small briefcase broke off from Columbia's external tank, struck its left wing, and damaged the shuttle's protective heat shield. In moments, Columbia disintegrated over the states of Texas and Louisiana, and all 7 crew members aboard Columbia perished, including Ilan Ramon. Ilan had brought a diary with him, and amazingly, 37 pages from that diary survived the crash and were given to his widow, Rona. That diary is now on public display at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Ilan also carried with him into space a small Torah scroll with an extraordinary story behind it, which is part of a beautiful documentary movie entitled An Article of Hope. And the movie is produced and directed by veteran broadcast journalist Dan Cohen, and before a recent showing of An Article of Hope at the Jewish Carmel Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut, I had the chance to sit with Dan in a classroom to talk about his moving film, An Article of Hope, and the story of Ilan Ramon. First of all, congratulations, you did an extraordinary film.
Thank you.
But then I'm saying to myself, how did it happen? And I'm sure you ask that all the time, but you do a film about Ilan Ramon and the extraordinary contribution he made to the state of Israel and tragic death, but this had to interest you for some reason. Why?
Well, there were a lot of things that went into my interest in the film. First and foremost, ever since I was a little child, I've been a space geek, a space nut. Space exploration is a passion of mine. And I'm a journalist, and my background's in television journalism. And so when the Columbia accident happened, I was actually very tuned into it.
You remember it happening?
Oh, vividly, yeah. And
it was a shocker.
Oh, it was a huge shocker to most of the world, because most of the world really wasn't even aware that there was a space shuttle mission at that time, and particularly over the western part of the United States where the shuttle exploded. It happened very early in the morning in the west and over West Texas, where most of the debris came down. The path of the shuttle debris went 230 miles. And a lot of people on the ground their houses shook, and people were frightened. They didn't know what was going on. And then a couple weeks later, I was reading a newspaper, and I came across an article about this little Torah scroll that Ilan Ramon had carried with him to space, which turns out to be an artifact from the Holocaust. And I thought to myself, wow, what an interesting story, and what a fascinating new way to tell a Holocaust story to a new generation through space exploration and technology. And from there, I dove into it, and I've yet to come up to the surface. I think 8 years later.
Dan, that's a lovely.
9 years later.
That's a lovely story. Did the Holocaust mean something to you before the event?
Hugely.
Because?
Well, I was born 9 years after World War II, so you might say I'm the next generation. And sadly, most people who survived the Holocaust, most people from the World War II era are now in the autumn of their lives, are passing away. And I feel very, very strongly that we all have an obligation to tell these stories, to continue telling these stories. And particularly as the first generation to come along after World War II.
Yes, but you were born in the 50s.
Right.
You grew up in the 60s.
Correct.
Okay. Something had to touch you, because there are a lot of people, Dan, who were born in the 60s or grew up in the 60s and later, for whom the Holocaust is somewhere around the Civil War. And they don't have the sensitivity to it that you do.
It's not around the Civil War if you were born to parents who were of the World War II era.
Okay, they're not survivors.
They were not survivors, no.
They were not in Europe at the time.
But I had family members, distant family members, who were survivors. I was never close to them, but I certainly knew they existed.
Did you have a strong Jewish identity growing up?
Yeah, of course I did. In terms of a religious identity, my identity is as a Jew, and my identity with Israel, and et cetera. But really, from a humanitarian standpoint, you stop and you look at the world today, and you start to dive in deeply into this story of the Columbia crew. And really, this is really, for me, part of the heart of the story, is that the Columbia crew was the most diverse group of astronauts ever to fly together in space. And they brought diversity to their mission. When they first started to train, they trained 5 years before they took off. The mission was delayed and delayed. And they were just a group of astronauts, but by the time they took off, they were family.
Remind us who they were.
There was African American, there was a woman who was born in India, but a naturalized American citizen. The commander, Rick Husband, was a incredibly religious man. He was Christian, and his faith was everything to him. And of course, you had Ilan Ramon, an Israeli Jew. And so you really had this really beautiful representation of the world. And at a time in a moment in our history right now, I think we can all take a lesson from this as to what diversity means and what we bring to each other. When, as Rona Ramon says so eloquently in the film, what happens when we all work together for the greater good? And so that became, as the filmmaker, that became a very important part of the film for me.
How well did you get to know Ilan Ramon through your work in the film?
Sadly, obviously, I never met him.
Yes, I understand.
I feel like I met him. And I feel like I met him because I got to know the people around him. And I got to know particularly Yoya, who was Yacham Joseph, the scientist who was part of the Israeli science team supporting Ilan Ramon during the mission, was the survivor. He survived Bergen-Belsen. And the Torah scroll that Ilan Ramon carries to space belonged to him. And when he was 13 years old, he was in Bergen-Belsen. He had his bar mitzvah in secret in the barrack. The little Torah scroll, it's only about that big, was smuggled into the camp by a rabbi who was in the camp. And at the end of the ceremony was held at 5 o'clock in the morning. They threw blankets on the windows. It lasted 10 minutes so the Nazis wouldn't come bursting in. At the end of the ceremony, the rabbi says, "I'm not going to survive this, but I think you will. So I'm going to give you, as your bar mitzvah gift, the little Torah scroll, with a condition that you always use it to tell the world what happened here in Bergen-Belsen." And the little boy, Yoya, promised he would. He took the scroll. Tragically, a few months later, the rabbi died. But Yoya survived, and so did his family. He ultimately ends up in Israel. He ultimately grows up to be a physicist. And he ultimately ends up part of this incredible Columbia mission with Ilan Ramon, supporting Ilan with the science work. And one day, Ilan is in Yo-Yo's apartment in Tel Aviv. They became very close because of the mission. And one day, Ilan is in his study, and he looks up and he sees the scroll on the shelf, and he says to Yo-Yo, "What is the scroll?" Yo-Yo tells Ilan the story of the scroll, at which point Ilan stands up and he looks him right in the eye, and he says, "You know, Yo-Yo, my mother and my grandmother were survivors of Auschwitz. I need to think about this." And he goes back to Houston. He doesn't say anything else. 2 months later, he called Yo-Yo on the phone, and he says, "Yo-Yo, I would like to take your Torah scroll to space with me, to show the world what a man can do when you go from the depths of hell to the heights of space." And he did. He took the scroll with him, and from the flight deck of Columbia, he told the story. And our film follows the path of the scroll from Bergen-Belsen to Columbia.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, we have a go for main engine start. 5, 3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff on Space Shuttle Columbia.
President Bush was quick to express the nation's grief.
The Columbia's lost. On board was a crew of 7.
February 1st, the final day of Columbia, in a very unbelievable manner, closed another circle.
Efforts to recover debris continue.
Ilan Ramon, first Israeli to fly in space, was on board this mission.
We were told that we would be separated from our parents. We were put on the cattle train. Doors were locked. We said hello. We said goodbye. The rabbi of the people in the camp, he said, "Well, promise me that you will tell the story. What happened here?" He pressed this Torah into my hands, and I looked at him and said, "Okay, I promise."
Zoom into Israel here, where our world-famous astronaut Ilan Ramon is from.
Ilan Ramon said, "I would like to ask you to give me this little Torah to take to space."
He told me I am the representative of all the people of Israel.
He thought he would show it to the world as a symbol of how a person can go from the depth of hell to the heights of space.
Our pride, our hope were accompanying him, and it took off.
Talk about the name of the film.
An Article of Hope. It took us 7 years to make the film, and I think it took us almost 8 years to figure out the name of the film. You know, the Article of Hope in this film represents something different for each of the characters involved.
Good for you.
The Article of Hope for Yo-Yo was the promise he kept to the rabbi. Of course, the Article of Hope was the scroll itself, the symbol of his faith, the rabbi. By creating the bar mitzvah alone in the barrack, in this horror of horrors, the rabbi wasn't creating the bar mitzvah, he was creating a moment for the barrack. The Article of Hope for Ilan Ramon was Ilan Ramon's way to show the world who he was and what he represented. And of course, the Article of Hope for the Columbia crew is this magnificent diversity that they bring, with a story that's woven around them in this horrific attempt to stamp out diversity in the world.
If somebody says to you, what is your movie about? Is it about the Columbia crew? Is it about an Israeli astronaut who perishes in this tragic accident?
The story of An Article of Hope is a journey of the human spirit. It's about survival, it's about faith, it's about hope, it's about what's possible.
How's it about faith?
Well, for the rabbi, it was about faith. For the rabbi, it was your faith will carry the day.
In some way, then, you see your film emanating out of that moment at Bergen-Belsen.
You know, I see, well, it could, but I see the film emanating from the Columbia crew, because I'm hooked on this stark contrast between the Columbia crew and what the Holocaust was all about, was to wipe out diversity amongst humanity. And so that's, for me, that was part of the striking message. Of course, you know, the mission of the film is to help a little boy who made a promise to a dying rabbi to always tell the story. That is the mission of the documentary.
Yes, in essence, your movie is telling that story.
Absolutely, absolutely. But when you peel back the layers, when I first started doing my research in the film, I thought I was making a Holocaust story.
No kidding.
And then I discovered that this was a story that crossed generations and leaped into the...
Okay, but the impetus for you was to tell a Holocaust story.
Correct. But then as I started to peel back...
In a context that you loved, namely space and the astronauts.
Correct.
Oh, I get chills. That's quite something. And so, as is true for many artists, the creative process itself leads you even to greater understandings.
Well, what happened was that I had an opportunity to start filming almost immediately. During the mission, when Ilan Ramon did his television broadcast, Ariel Sharon, who was then Prime Minister, invited the Columbia crew and their families to come to Israel on a VIP tour. You know, for an American audience, you know, a shuttle crew was a shuttle crew, but for an Israeli audience, this was huge. Ilan Ramon was huge.
A huge hero, by the way.
Huge.
And we should make sure everybody understands he was a very successful fighter pilot and test pilot before he was an astronaut.
Yeah, but I don't think people really realized that until after he was killed. His real history.
Okay, his celebrity in Israel was as an astronaut.
At that point, yeah, it was a matter of pride. You know, I mean, Shimon Peres has a line in the film: "Our pride, our hopes, our dreams, many hopes were with him when he took off," and that truly was what he was about to Israel. And so Ariel Sharon had invited the Columbia crew and their families to come on almost like a victory lap, you know. And shortly after the accident, Rona Ramon took the families on the tour that the crew was never able to make. And so she invited us to come with her for the film. And
how soon after the event did you begin this?
Well, I began my research just a few weeks really after I saw the article.
Okay.
But I think, I guess it was maybe less than a year we were in Israel.
And how much cooperation did you get from NASA and from the state of Israel?
There were no problems at all. It was very clear that I was not making a film about the accident. And even if I was, I don't think it would have been a problem with NASA.
Look, you're a veteran journalist.
Yeah.
Doesn't that surprise you just a little bit? Very often, doors are closed just because doors are closed.
Well, I did come into the story at the beginning of the investigation into Columbia. And so there were parameters that any journalist at that point had to follow because, you know, a lot of things were quarantined while the investigation was going on. But I never had an ounce of doubt or an ounce of, wait a minute, you can't go there. It's just the opposite. Everybody I came in contact with, from NASA all the way through to the families, to friends, everybody kept saying to me, what can I do to help?
They welcomed you, didn't they?
Absolutely. And I think part of it was, it goes back to the Columbia crew. I think part of it goes back to Ilan Ramon, the person he was. You know, Yo-Yo has a line in the film, when Ilan walked into a room, everybody noticed. You know, he wasn't a very tall guy, you know.
Enormously charismatic.
Yeah.
Don't you wish you'd know him?
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you watch your film, you just wish you'd known him.
Oh, yeah, it drives me crazy.
Yes.
I never got to meet him. And it's you know terribly sad that none of us got to meet him.
Yes.
But I'm hoping through my film, we all get to meet him.
Was there a hard moment for you in making this film? I mean emotionally. Was there a hard emotional moment for you?
Oh, the whole film. Yeah, I guess the hardest moment for me was Yo-Yo, Joachim Joseph, and I became very close. And I promised him I would make the film. And sadly, he passed away before we finished the film. But his family is close. His oldest daughter and I are in constant contact. And I went to her right away and I said, I want to keep in touch with you because I want to make sure you know that we finished the film.
Does the film ever make you cry?
I guess sometimes I get emotional at screenings like we're doing here because I see how people react to the film. I crafted the film. Nobody ever sits through credits, in a movie. You don't go to a movie theater, everybody gets up.
I sit through credits, but
right.
I know I look around the room. The room is empty.
And this has nothing.
I'm a professional. I love the credits.
People in our business sit through credits. In this film, most people sit through the credits, and I don't think they sit through the credits to. I wish they would, but to read the credits. They sit through the credits because they're sitting there thinking about the powerful story they've just watched.
They can't move.
Right. And that's the story. It has nothing to do with me. It's the story.
It may have nothing to do with you, but you're the one who crafted it, and you're the storyteller. And that's, as I said to you when we began, you deserve enormous credit, Yasha Koach, and
Thank you.
did a spectacular job. This is not your first journalistic endeavor. Is this your first major Jewish work? I mean, you've been a journalist for how long?
30 years, I guess.
Okay. And you've worked in television.
Television
You've
news.
worked also in other areas of filmmaking.
Right.
Okay. But am I correct that this is your first really Jewish-oriented film?
This is my first major documentary. Mm-hmm. And I picked a big one
Yes,
with a lot
did.
of dots to connect. I picked a monster. But you know what? I have to tell you, you're as good as the people who surround you. And I worked with incredible storytellers, incredible filmmakers to make this film. Christopher Cowan, one of the producers on the film, is an incredibly talented man. Stephen Holloway, the photographer, when he looks through the lens of his camera, he tells a beautiful story. Ryan Rothmeyer is a magnificent editor when he sits in front of his edit suite. And Blake Neely is crafted music that drives the film. And so when you have people like that as part of the creative team, you have a vision, and then everybody takes the vision and puts their fingerprints on it.
Is this in your mind for television release, or is there any chance you could have a theatrical release?
No, at this stage, it's for television release. We're working to put the film on PBS. We're searching for underwriting right now to put the film on PBS. PBS is a kind of weird world. They don't pay you, you pay them, because they're a nonprofit network. It's life as it is, and so we're searching for underwriting support.
You already said you were born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s. It's a very different world now from when you were a kid. You have a sensitivity that I already spoke about in terms of your understanding of what the Holocaust meant to the Jewish people, and the film that you do here is in some way, as you've described it, it's your way of keeping this memory alive, not only for the rabbi, but because it means something to you. As you look out as a journalist today at the Jewish community of today and the larger world in general, how do you feel they relate to the Shoah, the Holocaust? Do you worry at all that despite the work you're trying to do with this film, there is an erosion of both awareness and caring about the Holocaust in the ways that you and your parents had as you grew up?
I have to tell you, I don't think that you can confine that sensitivity to just Judaism. I think you can, and the Holocaust. I think you can broaden that, and I think on a whole, we all stand to lose a sense of our past and where we've come from. And I think I just think
Why is that? Why is that?
I think we're going through a tremendous cultural change in not only in our society but around the world, and perhaps some of it's driven by technology, some of it's driven by ambition, whatever the reason. Some of it's driven by distance from events. Whatever the reason, I think that that humanity as a whole has lost touch with where we've come from and the lessons that we have learned from where we have come from. And perhaps this film, for those who watch it, can give pause and say we can be better than this.
That's lovely and wonderful. You're a very special man.
Thank you.
You've made an extraordinary film. I hope you go from strength to strength. This is not your last project. You and I will stay in touch.
Definitely.
I've enjoyed meeting you enormously.
Thank you.
And you bring so much, not only expertise to what you do, but there's a sensitivity that is very rare and wonderful. It's been a joy meeting you. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, all the success in the world with the film. And again, I hope you stay in touch with me.
Absolutely.
Dan Cohen, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
And that was my meeting with Dan Cohen, producer and director and guiding hand of the beautiful documentary An Article of Hope, the tragic story of the space shuttle Columbia, and the transcendent story of Israeli astronaut Colonel Ilan Ramon. And you heard Dan talk about his efforts to have PBS air the film, which requires financial underwriting. If you'd like to contribute to Dan's efforts, please visit Kickstarter.com and search for An Article of Hope. As always, I invite you to be in touch with me with any thoughts you may have to the Ilan Ramon story and Dan Cohen's documentary. Please email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. My thanks again to one of the wonderful Jewish schools here in America, the Jewish Carmel Academy in Greenwich, Connecticut, who made my meeting with Dan Cohen possible. And so until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.